Hoping it's working.
There you go.
It's live on Facebook.
You're live.
It says we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first doubleheader of 2021. We are super excited to have Steve Wirth with us this evening. Not only because he's a wealth of information, but he's also one of our board members and an ardent supporter of EMS history. So welcome, Steve. Doc, thanks for hanging out with me for another night this weekend. I will turn it over to you guys. Looking forward to it.
Hey, this is going to be fun. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Doc Clinchey here again, and I've got with me this evening Steve Wirth. Steve is an attorney with Page, Wolfberg and Wirth, a law firm. They specialize in EMS, and we're going to get into some depth on that a little later. Howdy, Steve. How you doing tonight?
Good evening, Doc. Great to be with you, and this is going to be fun. This is a great thing that we're doing, getting all this EMS history recorded from us older folks, us dinosaurs of EMS.
Yes, sir. So let's go back in the beginning.
Uh-oh, that goes way back.
You went through, well, you and I are both from northeastern Pennsylvania for part of our lives anyway. I didn't grow up there, you did. But you were in the first paramedic class at Williamsport Hospital, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I was the youngest person in the first paramedic class of Williamsport Hospital, Williamsport, Pennsylvania in 1979, back in the heyday. I sort of started at EMS when I lived in Florida, actually, in Vero Beach. I got interested in it. My buddy David Thompson and I delivered newspapers for the Miami Herald. And the guy who was the bureau chief for the Miami Herald in Vero Beach was also a volunteer fireman with the Vero Beach Volunteer Fire Department. And we used to hang out down at the fire station and chase fire trucks and ambulances with our bicycles when we weren't delivering newspapers. And met a guy, goes to show you how people you meet in your life can have such an impact. Fire captain by the name of Harwell Grice took us 12-year-old boys into the firehouse and treated us like adults. And we got so interested in it. It was to the point that I wanted to be a firefighter paramedic when I grew up. That's where that all started. So that's kind of the roots of it all. And then when we moved to Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania near Williamsport, a little place called Nippenose Valley, which was southwest of Williamsport in the little corner of Lycoming County. When we moved there, I was disappointed that we left Florida and all that. And so I wrote a letter to the local volunteer fire chief and didn't even know his name. And I said, I knew in Pennsylvania you could become a junior firefighter at age 14 even. Yep. And I was 15 at that time. And I wrote a letter to him, to the fire department, not knowing if they'd even get it. And about a week or two later, my mother calls up to me and says, somebody knocking at the door. And she says, Stephen, the fire chief is here to see you. And there he was, Jim Martin. He was the volunteer fire chief in Nippenose Valley, Pennsylvania, south of Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania. And he came into my home and met me and asked me to come up and join. And man, there's another person who, has a positive impact on you. I don't know if I'd ever gotten into it had he not shown up at my doorstep one cold evening, after work, so to speak. So that's how I got started as a volunteer in Nippenose Valley, Pennsylvania. And then a few years later, after becoming an EMT, I got fortunate to get selected for the paramedic program.
Very cool. Yeah, it's funny how we get started. I was a junior volunteer firefighter at the age of 14 in Westchester County, north of New York City.
Wow.
Became a regular member of the volunteer department at 16, and then took a paid job after I was done with college and was a paid firefighter with the department until I went into the Navy. So we've trodden some similar paths.
Yes. Exactly.
And the nice thing about youth programs like that, and I don't know how many of them there are anymore.
Yeah.
They really gave you a chance to meet some of the crusty old folks that were in the business.
That's right.
And they became your mentors.
Right. You're exactly right. And you and I, Doc, are fortunate to have good mentors in our lives. And that's something we need to do more of. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine. And I know the incoming president of the NAEMT is very, very interested, Bruce Evans, and he's put together a committee to really work on developing a more defined mentorship program. So yeah, if it wasn't for those few people we run into, but I'll tell you, the coolest thing when I was in high school as a junior firefighter EMT, and you might remember this, I don't know if they did it in your school, but they used to let us out of school to go on calls. It was the coolest thing. It was like, well, yeah, we were cool, you know, we got to go on calls, you know. And
I had a blue light in my car, man.
Yeah, we had blue lights and, you know, CB radios, you know, that's how, and of course we got to carry that pager that was really cool. So we were the cool high school nerds, the firefighter nerds.
You got it.
Yeah.
So you were in EMS. You became a paramedic in '79.
Yeah.
How long did you stay on the street up in the Williamsport area?
I was on the street a couple of years full time as a medic. They hired 12 of us that were in the course through the CEDAT program. It was a government program that paid our salaries basically for a period of time. And we all got hired upon graduation. So I worked 12-hour shifts for, I think it was a year and a half to 2 years. I became a paramedic instructor then, and then worked on the street as an instructor for a while. And then in 1983, I got recruited. I got involved in a project helping to design the EMS system up in Erie, Pennsylvania. I worked a little bit on one of the consulting reports that was prepared for that group up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which at the time was the third largest city in Pennsylvania after Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And then I got recruited to be the number 2 person up in Emergicare in Erie in 1983 to help start that company, which was really a cool joint venture between 3 hospitals and the city of Erie. It was really a pretty cool thing.
Very cool. So you have been on the street, then you're in management. And then what struck you to end up in law school from which you graduated in '94?
That's a good question. Well, once again, mentors came into play. And I worked with a consultant by the name of Ray Fells. He was a public relations consultant. And I worked with Ray. He helped us develop our annual membership subscription program. I'm familiar with those in EMS. It was we brought in $1.5 million at one point back in about 1990, 91, when I left to go to law school. But Ray said to me, you ought to, Earl, my boss, Earl, was the CEO, he's going to be here a while. You really ought to go to law school. And I had a local attorney we worked with. He encouraged me to go to law school. He said, I think you'd be a good lawyer. I mean, and I never really thought that much about it until a couple of people like Ray Fells prompted me to go to law school and really pushed me, sort of said, you can do this. This is, get out of town, get out of Erie. I've been in Erie about 8 years at that point. And that's how, so I was an older student in law school. I went full time.
For those that, let me break in a minute. For those that are not familiar with where Erie is, you started out in the eastern part of Pennsylvania.
Right, north central.
Ended up in the western part of Pennsylvania on the shores of Lake Erie.
Yeah, the great northwest corner. Beautiful place. Erie, Pennsylvania is just a beautiful place. It gets a bad rap because we get a lot of snow in the wintertime. You can tell stories about that. It's similar to the Buffalo experience, but it was a great place, and it was fun to be on the ground floor to build an EMS system, from the ground floor up, and to work with so many good people in our hospital system there. And then we got grants to do training. We did 6 weeks of full-time management training for all the supervisors. I mean, it's kind of stuff you don't see today.
Very
We're
cool.
able to establish that early on.
So there you are. You've done all that stuff, and now you've got a law degree in 1994. And where did you go at that point once you had the JD?
Oh, well, I worked in the summer in Pittsburgh for a large national law firm that specialized in labor and employment. And then I transferred to Harrisburg. I went to another large firm and started to get calls from my, former colleagues and current colleagues in EMS asking for legal help, because nobody was out there. Law firms didn't understand EMS, as you well know, Doc. And, they'd call their lawyer up, and the lawyer, they'd have to spend half an hour explaining to their local lawyer what the difference between an EMT and a paramedic was, that kind of stuff. And they just didn't comprehend. They thought EMS was just a ride to the hospital, like some people still think. So I was getting calls and, picking up clients. And it got to the point that another good friend of mine in my life, Doug Wolfberg, who had just gotten his law degree. And I had talked to Doug as he was going through the process of getting into law school. And basically he was getting clients as well. And we sort of said, hey, maybe we can do this together and join forces. We have some clients, and hey, let's call Jim Page. Jim was a friend of ours, and of course everybody knew Jim at the time as one of the founding fathers of modern day EMS and publisher of Gems magazine. He was a successful EMS. He was really like the first EMS attorney, I think. Mm-hmm. And we asked Jim to come into. We called him up from Doug's house one evening and said, gee, Doug says, do you think Jim would be interested in doing this? I think he would. I'm not so sure. He's like, well, let's call him up and find out. And at first, Jim didn't think there'd be enough business in EMS law. Okay. And then we said, we think there is. And he said, well, okay, then I'm in. So that's how that came about. The three of us started the firm late 1999, like in December. And then in January 2000 is when the firm actually started. So we're really into our 21st. We've had 21 years now mm-hmm. going into 22, starting our 22nd year in the business. Yeah.
Just a couple of questions for you on EMS law. Mm-hmm. I've been doing expert witness work for 32 years. Most right. of the stuff I do is plaintiff side. Every once in a while, actually the way I got started in it was a huge defense case, but I am astounded how often I encounter EMS agencies, private EMS operations, third services, have absolutely no clue how to defend themselves when a lawsuit is brought against them. Are you encountering a lot of that in your travels?
Yeah, I think we still see a lot of situations where the folks running EMS agencies don't fully understand the risk and understand what they need to do to prevent, or minimize the risk. That's probably the biggest part of our practice is education and just, teaching people, management people and folks like that, leaders how to, stay out of trouble. But yeah, it's interesting because I think EMS in the fire service as well, I think it's sort of developed in their own bubble, and what we've done, quite frankly, is taken a lot of risk management principles and from other industries and things and brought that into EMS. And, it's sort of like, we've got the brotherhood and sisterhood of EMS, but sometimes we're so close together, we don't look outside of that box. And that is, getting people to do that really has helped in terms of helping defend them in lawsuits. And it's also surprising, a lot of people think, oh, the most common lawsuit is negligence, from, harming a patient. It's not, okay? There's a lot of great immunities there in state law for paramedics and EMTs individually. Now, their agencies, their companies can well become liable for the actions of those caregivers. But the things we see more often than the negligence suits, not that we don't see them, we do, but are things like Fair Labor Standards Act violations, the day-to-day management problems, discrimination, sexual harassment, disability discrimination, HIPAA, patient privacy issues, compliance issues related to billing and reimbursement and revenue cycle management. That's a huge area with the advent of some of the whistleblower claims we've seen increasing over the years under the False Claims Act. So there's a whole array of types of things we deal with, from corporate things to personnel and HR related stuff to the business, reimbursement compliance area to HIPAA. So it's a wide range of stuff.
Yeah, reimbursement is an interesting area. Years ago, I had a position with an ambulance company, and I think my principal position is, aside from being vice president of the company and chief paramedic, was keep the owner out of jail for Medicare fraud.
Yeah.
I uncovered a situation that was just mind-blowing. And I picked up the phone and called some attorney friends of mine in Philadelphia. And I said, who is the best Medicare Part B attorney in the city of Philadelphia? And they gave me a name. And I called that attorney and I said, I have a new client for you. And how these people get that I've seen more stuff lately, medical stuff occasionally, but more often than not, as you've mentioned, motor vehicle issues where they have accidents. And then you go to the company and you say, okay, what's your policy and procedure manual look like in this area? They don't have any.
Oh, yeah. We still occasionally run into people who say, well, we don't have policies because if you have policies, then it's in writing and that can get you in trouble. Oh, my goodness. We still run into that. But you touched upon the number one area of liability in EMS, and that's driving, operating that emergency vehicle. And this misplaced notion that you got to run to every call with lights and siren, speeding down the road. In my fire department at Hampton Township in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, I was active there as safety officer and a driver operator myself for up until just the last couple of years. But there was a sign we had on the door as you drove out with the rig. It was, if you arrive on the scene 30 seconds late, nobody will remember that. But if you arrive 30 seconds early and kill somebody in the process of getting there, no one will ever forget that. So, the point, of course, is that a minute, half a minute, 2 minutes doesn't make a difference really in the outcomes of the patients, as we both know. And still to this day, getting people out of that siren side mentality is still very difficult, despite the evidence that's being shown. Like Dr. Doug Kupis has written he and several colleagues published a report on this, a study on it. It really, speed doesn't make a difference in most cases. So yeah, you hit on the main point, really, main area of liability.
Scott Phelps with me last night touched on something rather interesting. And I know from having talked to you before that you try to encourage your clients to get the big picture of what they are doing. And Scott mentioned that in the city of New York, the Fidney paramedics are still making about the same dollars that they were making 10 years ago, but the buying power of that salary has evaporated.
Yes.
And I think from chatting with you before, when we've been together somewhere else, part of what you guys are trying to do in your law firm is inculcate a management perspective that takes a lot of those things into consideration. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a real problem, especially now with the pandemic and COVID-19. Put simply, we don't pay our EMS practitioners, that's what we like to call them now, EMS practitioners, the enough money that reflects the value of that job to society.
Right.
When you look at what EMS practitioners do, saving lives and putting themselves at great risk to harm and injury and disease. And I know in Pennsylvania, there are some areas in rural Pennsylvania where full-time EMTs are making $10 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. That's below the poverty line for a family of four. And that is a major impediment, I think, to recruitment and retention that we really have to address. And one good thing about this pandemic, Doc, when you think about trying to make some lemonade out of lemons here, it's put EMS and public safety at the forefront. I mean, when did you see EMS personnel on the front cover of Time magazine? Not until this year. Because there's a greater appreciation now for our heroes, our first responders. And EMS is in that mix. Fortunately, we've been able to stay in that instead of being, those other EMT people, as one elected congressman said after 9/11, we want to thank our firefighters, police, and those other people, those EMT people. That's what he said on national news. So we've risen above that in terms of recognition. And that's going to help because elected officials at the local level are starting to say, we do have to put some money in our EMS system so that we have good people, because there's a lot of people who've been around who are leaving EMS now. I've talked to a lot of my friends who said, you know what, I was going to stick it out a couple more years, but I'm going to retire now, because of the pressures with the COVID-19 sort of tipped them over the edge. And this is why we've really got to work on mentoring and bringing up in the ranks those new leaders who are going to, do things to help.
I think the impact of that too that disturbs me, and I think you'll probably agree with this, is that you and I have seen really strong EMS practitioners go somewhere else.
Yes.
Because there was no incentive for them to stay in the profession.
That's right.
That's really disturbing.
Doug and I teach at the University of Pittsburgh. We've been teaching in the EMS degree program there for nearly 20 years. Mm-hmm. And it's gratifying. It's been a stepping stone for a lot of our graduates. I can rattle off names of our graduates who went to our EMS law course who are now doctors, nurse practitioners, healthcare administrators, PAs, it runs the gamut. Now there's some, of course, still in EMS, but, when you look at, I years ago, my first cousin, Scott, called me up after he was going to go to paramedic school. And he says, well, but I also thinking about going to nursing school. And he says, which do you think would be better for long-term in terms of income and security? And I said, well, I hate to tell you, Scott, but being a nurse is going to give you a little more money overall. And that's sad, but, because really when you look at what our folks are doing on the front lines as EMS practitioners, the value of that job is just as good as equal to nurses and doctors and other people who are in the healthcare system. Yeah.
From your perspective, other than mentoring, which we've touched on, how do we change that? How do we change that philosophy in our profession?
Yeah, it's tough. I don't think there's a magic bullet. I wish there was, or if you and I had figured that out, we wouldn't be sitting here doing this interview. We'd be laying on a beach at our own private island somewhere. But at the end of the day, it's a multitude of things, and a lot of it is education and getting your EMS agency integrated into the community, meeting with your elected officials, being transparent in what we do. We're our own worst enemies sometimes. I know to this day, I'm still seeing lawsuits and squabbles between, rescue squads and the local municipality, duking it out, and municipality de-designating the EMS agency because they don't give them any information and they're off doing their own thing. Everybody's got to come together and work as a team, elected officials, EMS providers, the leadership of all organizations. That's a start. Because it's surprising how many local elected officials really don't understand how we're funded. And the fact is that our reimbursement doesn't keep up with the costs. There have been cost studies done under the Medicare program that says we're not, what Medicare pays us doesn't meet the cost of turning the wheel, so to speak, or providing that service. Another thing is a shift in reimbursement is important. That's a necessary thing. We're starting to see that. When I say shift, I'm talking about how do you get paid in EMS? You got to transport somebody to a hospital. That's how Medicare pays you. Right now, they don't pay you for treat at the scene, treat and release the patient, or, and how many times do you go and you give a diabetic D50 or you give an epileptic some Valium, or you get there and it's not a heart attack, it's something less than that. And maybe, that we got to get paid for that stuff because that's becoming a greater component, especially now with COVID-19. Now, the good news during the pandemic, Medicare has said, you can take patients to alternative destinations and we'll pay you for those now. Okay. even if it means going to an off-site medical facility, which prior to the pandemic, they wouldn't pay unless it was a hospital. Now they're paying, okay, temporarily. And then there's the program, the pilot program that's due to start early this year, the ET3 program, which Medicare has selected about 220 ambulance services across the country to participate, where they will pay for treatment to alternative destinations and treatment in place with telemedicine, with healthcare practitioners, you know, professionals, doctors and nurses who can. Yeah. So that we got to get paid for just more than the transport, you know,
Sure.
and that's going to, I think, help change things. But that's just 2 points, you know, but there's so many, we could spend an hour just talking about that.
Politically, for those 220 systems that are basically practicing community paramedicine, what kind of support do you think there is inside the Beltway for that concept and getting it permanent as opposed to an experiment?
Well, I know groups like the American Ambulance Association and NAMT have really been pushing our legislators in Washington to make these changes permanent under the Medicare program, to pay for these, you know, non-transport care encounters. I think the environment is positive for that. I think it's been positive under the current administration, and because the current administration has done a lot with innovation. You know, ET3 evolved during the current administration. The incoming administration is also in the same mindset, as I understand it, in looking at some of the things that they're looking at doing. So I think it's a shift in societal perception of our value that's happening. It's a positive thing. And that's going to lead to, I think, legislators taking notice and saying, look, we got to pay attention to EMS. We got to work on getting the money, because who's available when the patients need to go, when they've got the COVID symptoms and they're at home and they call, who's coming to their aid? EMS. Nobody else is coming. I think people are realizing that at the elected official level.
Yeah, one of my stops professionally was running a small EMS system in a very wealthy community, very low call volume. So my guys and gals had plenty of time on their hands. So one of the things we started to do in the law enforcement, they talk about a welfare check. We started doing wellness checks on residents. We had all the residents tell us what kind of chronic medical problems have you got, and we'd go out and check on them regularly. We'd take the ambulance out of the station and run around the neighborhoods and go see the people that we knew had chronic healthcare problems. I can see a real big opportunity there for EMS in that regard in the years ahead. What do you think?
Absolutely. And that's sort of a continuation of the mobile integrated healthcare concept, the community paramedicine approach. But yeah, and that's important. Absolutely. Look at what a lot of EMS agencies are doing now. They're assisting with the vaccination process in some states. Not all, but we're seeing a lot of EMS agencies assisting in that area. You know, we just need to recognize across the board that EMS is more than transporting patients. It's all about community healthcare. And when you think about it, this pandemic has really brought to everyone's attention as well that EMS is an integral part of the public health system. You know, we weren't really thought of as, you know, I mean, most EMS leaders never really thought of themselves as part of the public health system, but now we are. And there's an area where funding has gone down over the years for local county health departments and so forth at the state level and local level. Now we're going to see an increase in that. I think it's obvious that we were really caught off guard with this pandemic as a nation and not adequately prepared for it.
Agreed.
You know, if folks would have watched that video that who did that from Microsoft a few years back about global pandemics, and you know, and paid attention to that, we'd have been better off today.
I think we got caught with our pants down a little bit.
Bill Gates. I'm sorry, it's Bill Gates who did a lecture on this a number of years ago. So this is something we got to be ready for, folks, and we weren't.
Okay. you and I have invested some time and energy in the National EMS Museum.
Yes.
What do you see our role as being as the museum in terms of helping EMS grow?
Well, that's a really good question, Doc. And I think, people like history. I think by nature, human beings enjoy knowing about their past. Look at, all the websites you can access now to check genealogy. And people are interested and fascinated by their history. So we need to preserve that history. We need to let people know where we came from. We got to understand where we came from before we can really set a positive path going forward. And I think giving people that appreciation and understanding of our past and history really helps, I think, excite people into wanting to be a part of EMS. And that's what I think the museum is doing a great job with today, is preserving that history and getting it out there through electronic means. Because the reality is, as we learned from the pandemic, museums aren't necessarily physical locations anymore, okay? And, you could put a physical building somewhere and call it a museum. How many people are going to have access to it, okay? And use it? It's sort of like shopping malls, okay? We all used to go to the mall to shop. Where do we shop now? Well, I don't know about you, but I get that thing on my phone that says Amazon,
Yeah.
And, so we've got to move with that, and we've got to work on continuing to develop our electronic museum, which we're doing that and have done a good job. And we're building on that. And I think, I just hope that people appreciate what the museum is doing and will contribute to it, both in time and money, because it takes money to put this stuff together. And we've got a great membership program, different membership levels of benefits. And if we can get more people to join, I think that will help a lot.
Absolutely.
That's my commercial message for the museum.
And now a word from our sponsor, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think our time is up. Do you have any closing thoughts, Steve?
I just think that it's wonderful, the work that the museum does, but more importantly, the work that everybody is doing today in EMS. It is so valuable. And so many people appreciate what you do out on the street, folks listening. And I think it's time to take advantage of that and really tout our own horn with our local officials, with our people who are community leaders, to really let them see what we're doing every day. And fortunately, we're seeing more visibility, and that's important. And really just maintaining a good attitude. I've found in my life, we run up against challenges all the time. And there's days I don't feel so hot about this today. But if you wake up and with a smile on your face and really think positively and be grateful for the good things you have and the opportunity to serve others, I can't think of a job that's more rewarding than what we do in EMS, where you can actually touch somebody, talk to them, and help them and make them feel better right before your eyes. Where else can you do that but in EMS? So, I think it's important to remember that as part of our history of caregiving and as we move forward. So.
Great closing thought. Love it. Yep.
All right. Well,
Christy, would you care?
I like all that.
I
like your library back there, Doc. I mean, you've got, do you have like 2 or 3 library rooms there at your house?
I got a lot of stuff there.
Yes, I can see that. You're probably like me, a bit of a hoarder.
No, actually, those are almost all companies that I represent in the white binders. And the thin white binders are probably legal cases that I'm still involved with.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I'm
Great.
kind of.
Excellent. Well, this has been fun.
Put it that way.
I even brought my coffee.
Cool, man. All right.
This is our dog Piper. Dear Daddy, thanks for picking
Golden
up.
Retriever, right? Yeah. Got it. Cool.
And that is the perfect segue, because we have another pet first aid class scheduled in February. So that date will be released shortly. If you haven't sat in on that class, I would encourage anybody watching to do that. If you have furry creatures in your life, Thank you, Steve. You've pretty much taken my script off my hands, so I won't say much tonight, like most nights.
Cool.
We're up again for coffee in 2 weeks, so January 29th and 30th. And with any luck, I'll be able to show you a bit of our new digital library. Fingers crossed that technology will work with me these next couple of weeks, because we will have Tom Dick on with us. And
Tom's a great guy, a dear friend. And
donated.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Yeah.
So,
thanks for putting this together tonight, Christy. It's been great. Thanks.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Anybody listening out there that wants to participate, be sure to drop us a note in the comments, either here or on YouTube when it goes up on YouTube, or you can send the office note, info@emsmuseum.org, and we'll be sure to book you out. We are looking at spring and summer time slots now, so this is going on for a long time.
Cool.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Thanks
both.
again, Steve.
Have a good evening. Be safe out there. Take care.